All right, thanks for coming back to the show. Today I have Kate Kirchner with me, and I'm so excited because we met through a few of our networks, but in the great work redesign, she's really hitting it on the nose of where some of our top talent is being hidden and how we can support them when it may not look the same as what traditionally we thought top talent looked like. And really what we're getting back to is how do people work best? How can we optimize productivity with the great talent we already have indoors? And that's why I brought Kate in as a vocational coach and consultant. She works with organizations on optimizing that top talent and making sure people are set up for success in the way that they work best. So, welcome, Kate, to the show and supporting the workforce energy management movement. I appreciate you being here today.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity. This is a topic I'm really passionate about. I also love everything you do, so I appreciate you having me.
Yeah, and so me and Kate look at work a little bit differently because we see where people's skill sets and ta talents lie and how we can get them to get into their sweet spot, right? We're talking about the flow state, that natural energy. And Kate, how did you kind of get into this? Let's get into your story of how you got
Yeah.
into vocational coaching.
Sure. So I've always, from a young age, just been passionate about helping other people, and that kind of morphed into specifically this desire to work with people with disabilities. And one of the things that came in that got me really interested in Vogue is just the fact that this is something we all do. It's such a huge part of our identity. When you think about it, the first thing a new person asks you after they meet you is, "What do you do?" And sadly, I was aware that people with disabilities are out of the workforce at huge levels, and they don't have a huge opportunity to build that part of their personality. And that really saddened me, to be very honest. So I just wanted to be part of giving people more opportunities, opportunities to be successful, opportunities to grow, and also just kind of break that stigma out there about employing people with disabilities. So it's really became a passion of mine over my 20 years of doing this.
Yeah, and it's interesting because where our conversation started was people with disabilities in the labor market and how they're struggling to get jobs. And then on the other side, we have companies that are struggling to get people. And
Yeah.
so as me and Kate kind of talked about closing that gap and how we can do that in this big work redesign that I'm leading is unseen disabilities. And I thought that was interesting because she
Yes.
said the talent's out there, but we're not setting them up for success. And so let's talk a little bit about these unseen disabilities that might be in our workforce or in the labor force, and we're trying to meet them where they're at.
Sure, exactly. So, unseen disabilities just means that unlike someone who has a physical disability, let's say, they're in a wheelchair, they have a visual impairment, they have a cane, and we can see that. We know that that kind of signals, hey, maybe we need to do things a little differently. Unseen disabilities are the things like learning disabilities, or a big term right now is neurodivergent. And unpacking that a little bit, all that means is someone has a brain that might think a little bit differently than what's considered average. So, like I said, this covers learning disabilities, it can cover mental health, PTSD. Another thing a lot of people struggle with that we don't know, chronic pain conditions or autoimmune conditions. Things that aren't apparent but are so common and can impact people in all facets of their life, especially employment.
Yeah, I mean, you just listed a bunch of categories where even in my HR career, people don't come to you for help, and they struggle. And there could be mild accommodations that we could do to set them up for success. Or similar on the talent side, we might have interviews or great skill sets of candidates come in and the interview doesn't go great. Again, on both sides did we set them up for success because they sounded great on the phone or the video interview we get them in person and it's like, ooh, this is not a good fit. But also there's certain environments that go into that. You talked about PTSD. I remember this one candidate that I had and the interview went horrible, and up to that point we thought we were going to hire this person, and they had an episode in the parking lot and they could not reset. And it also saddens me that people cannot speak up about that because we would have
Right.
rescheduled. And I actually saw that candidate at a different client in the future, and I'm glad that they landed there. And they said, "Yeah, I will never forget that moment of having a panic attack in your parking lot." And I said,
Hmm.
"Why didn't you say anything?" And he's like, "I didn't have the job yet. I'm
Right.
interviewing."
Yes.
It puts him in a place, right?
Yes, people are so scared to admit this because there is still a lot of stigma, a lot of misconceptions. And especially before, like you said, before someone even gets an offer, they don't want to go to an employer and say, oh, I struggle with panic attacks or I learn differently. They're just afraid that employers are going to automatically say, okay, you know what, we don't want an employee like that. And that is just so sad. And things like that just block top talent. Because as you said, he landed somewhere else. I'm sure, he's doing a great job. And it was simply his fear out of not telling you that prevented him from being your great candidate. And that's really unfortunate. I find we just have to normalize these things and the fact that we are all people and we all go through things and it's okay. It's okay to admit that. It's okay to try and ask for things that you think will make you successful.
Yeah. Okay, let's dig into that just a little
Yeah.
bit because this was years ago, and I feel like the conversation
Yeah.
is getting a little light around it. It's a lot more prevalent in
Yes.
conversations. Just last year when I was doing phone interviews and video interviews, I would say something like, "Is there any accommodations we can do to make sure this is a successful experience for you?"
That's
Something like
awesome.
that. And people didn't feel weird when I asked that.
Yeah.
And I definitely feel like years ago that was a weird question to ask. So when we're looking at a current workforce and you want to start bringing up those topics, because that's a little bit close to home, right?
Yes.
Candidates, they come and they go, maybe they're on board, maybe they weren't, but let's talk about a team, right? It gets a little bit more interesting, that conversation, because you want to build the trust, not break it. So when we talk about shining light on unseen disabilities and you see someone struggling and you kind of want to bring up that conversation, maybe new ways of working that will set them up for success versus the
Yep.
limitation. What are some things that you coach clients on to make that more of a comfortable and casual, welcoming conversation versus, you're creating this whole conflict conversation
Yes.
in your head and it's really just about setting them up for success?
Definitely. And also just making it approachable and easy and not where we're already overcomplicating it with like, oh, I need to offer a bunch of accommodations or, that like making ourselves nervous and scared about it. One way that I tell clients to work with employees they see might be struggling, don't wait till the performance review. Don't wait until it's time and you can't fix it and you can't help them. Simply just taking them aside, and I even say, think of a few positive things they're doing. Taking them aside and say, you've done this really great, or we really appreciate you've done, XYZ. But then, but I see it seems you're struggling a little bit with whatever it is. Is there something I can do to help you? Or is there something going on? Like, I'd love to, be a resource for you so we can chat about it. Right. So now we're making it an inviting conversation instead of you're doing this wrong. We need to fix it. This is a performance problem. And that puts people on guard and nervous right away. Whereas if we encouch it more in that, hey, I care about you and I want to see you be successful here. What can we do about it together? That's a much better way to approach it. And there's usually a much higher success rate as well of helping that candidate actually move along and be successful. So I try and just say, make it an easy, natural conversation you would almost have with a friend who you see struggling. I see you struggling. What's going on? Like, how can I help you?
Yeah, and I love that you put the context that some of these modifications and accommodations are extremely
So
small.
easy.
For
So easy.
example, we had I remember an employee conversation where it became this big to-do around performance, right? Because they waited too long for the conversation, and it was around noise and construction going on around
Yep.
their area, and it was very triggering for them. And so they're trying to focus and get back into work and get in that deep focus, but they're managing a panic attack all day is
Right.
kind of what it came down to. And again, it wasn't a good, comfortable environment to have the conversation, so it built and built until poor performance. Now,
Yep.
now we're backtracking, and you had to build up all that trust and communication again. So I love that you're talking about making it casual because really we don't understand until we start having the conversation about
Right. And another piece too that I would love to see more people do is like have this part of your orientation process. Have it for every single candidate. Not talking about struggling, but hey, welcome to the team. We want to know a little bit. What do you think makes you most successful? What past roles have you been at that you feel like you've achieved a lot of success, and what did things look like for you? How do you learn best? Do you like written instructions? Do you like verbal instructions? Are visual cues helpful? How cool would that be if you start day one, walk into a team, and they really care about your success and how you learn? That would feel amazing. Like that would, for just morale alone and the excitement about wanting to be there and wanting to work with this team. Um, that's a huge benefit for employers in terms of retention and excitement and motivation. And then also you can have that conversation on the front end without it seeming awkward that someone now has to request something as an accommodation. Hey, this is something we do for all our employees. We want to figure out what makes them successful, and we want to set them up with that from the get-go. So it also makes it less of an us them thing, right? This is just what we do for everyone.
Yeah,
So,
and I love that it's a team conversation because sometimes I think another thing gets put on leaders or the HR person or whoever's onboarding, and really it's the team can have peer support, and that's where some of that community comes out because in unseen disabilities, sometimes people don't even know they have a disability,
right.
right?
Yes, there's
They've had
that
some
too.
hardships or some hurdles, and they just assume that's how life is.
Yes,
And so talking to other people, and we had a lot of engineers, and they had detailed work on their screens, and so some of them struggled by the end of the day, and they're snapping at people, and it's because they've put so much strain on themselves at the computer, in and out interruptions when they're supposed to be doing deep work. And so when one person started taking out the lights above their desk, for example, those fluorescent lights
yes,
that it
yes,
doesn't bother some of us, but it does overstimulate others.
yes.
And someone took them out, and other people are like, "Oh, well, can we do that?" And it was a spread of, yeah, I think I could work better and have less headaches and overstimulation if we could take
Yes.
out a few of these bulbs above us. And it's not for everyone, but it was interesting that they didn't need HR and a leader to get involved, right? It was a team community support system.
Exactly. Exactly. And I like to, because I remember you and I talked about that example, and I loved that example, because like you said, it's something so simple that they didn't need to go to HR. They didn't need to make it this huge big deal that's going to escalate things for everyone, like escalate the time from HR. Now they have to submit paperwork as to why they need it. So that saves everyone a ton of time. And then you came up with a super creative example because I know one of the barriers someone had brought up was, well, what if customers come in and think it's a little awkward, if it's a little dark in here? And you had said, well, we can just train, the sales staff to say our engineers work so hard, they are so detail oriented that sometimes their eyes are just exhausted by the end of the day. So we make it a little easier to optimize their ability to do awesome work for you, right? That's a really quick retrain of the sales people rather than let's turn in a bunch of paperwork and let's make it awkward for you to ask for this thing that's just going to help you be more productive and deliver better value for our end product. So, yeah, I loved that example and I loved your creative thinking of, we can just tell the sales staff to talk a bit differently was a good solution. So again, just like bringing in even another team to help.
Yeah. So, for common unseen disabilities that you see within your clients, what are a few suggestions that kind of keep coming up or scenarios that
Yes.
keep coming up, especially because you're working with um, the direct leaders, so supervisors, managers, because usually that's who's going to see it first or have the conversation
Yes,
first.
definitely.
And it will be more natural at that level. But as you're working with them, what are some common unseen disabilities you're seeing and the accommodations that you've guided clients on that weren't, like you said, big paperwork piles, adjustments of the operation, right? And what I'm trying to get is this is the work redesign, getting people to work
Yes.
best in a successful way that's natural to them. And so you and me have exchanged a few already, but I think they have just been gold because we over complex this situation.
Yeah, definitely. So just kind of some of the accommodations I see being successful and some of the unseen disabilities that I see most.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
So, one of the unseen disabilities I have a lot of experience with is PTSD. And you already talked about this, but A lot of PTSD has to do with kind of having those sensory triggers, right? Those things that sort of bring us back to that place. And then we have a hard time resetting. So, this is where we have had some of the most simple accommodations that have been so successful. So, just to give a couple examples, I had a client who she was working in a warehouse and she actually could handle the noise level. So it wasn't that startled her. But what it was, if a teammate or someone approached kind of more from behind, that would really startle her. And she was actually missing almost 50% of her work shifts because she could not reset after this. And so we kind of talked to the manager. And he actually came up with this idea. It was great. He's like, you know what I could do? I could just like snap. I could just snap. He's like, I could do it when I'm walking up to anyone, so it doesn't seem like it's just her. So he started doing that. He just started snapping when he was going to approach her from the back or from the side. And the other cool thing was, too, everyone on the team appreciated this. Whether you have PTSD or not, like no one really loves being like, oh, wow, okay, you needed something. And so everyone loved this. Everyone loved the fact that he would come up snapping. This costs absolutely nothing. It took us about 10 seconds to figure out, and she ended up not missing nearly as much work. She was probably to like almost 90% by the time we had done this. So that was awesome. Another gentleman I worked with PTSD, it was more, he would get triggered. And for him, it wasn't necessarily about eliminating the trigger because he worked in an environment where that actually wasn't really a possibility. We kind of would have had to change some of the essential functions, and that's just not something I ever recommend, right? It was more about what do you do when you're triggered so you can reset and go back. So for this gentleman, he really something really cold, if he could feel something super cold, he could kind of snap back, ground himself, and be able to return. So we put a water bottle in the freezer and he would just go grab the water bottle. And his manager knew this. We talked to the manager ahead of time and they're like, just give me a little wave, we'll know what you're going to do. And he was gone for literally like 30 seconds, and this wasn't something he needed to do often. It was maybe once, max twice, an 8-hour shift. Not a big deal at all. And again, he really was able to reset and get back into the work. So that's kind of some examples of PTSD. Another big one I work with is more just kind of generalized learning disabilities. Some really easy ones there are simple like color coding of things or organizing things differently, writing out a task list for someone, even having someone when they're completed a task or two tasks or three tasks, however many they can handle, checking in and okay, I'm done with this. What's my next thing? It works differently for everyone. Visual cueing. I was working with a client who he was working in a janitorial role, and he for some reason, like even though these bottles were different colors, he would get like the Windex bottle confused and the toilet bottle confused. And for a while, we're like, okay, the same color, they're different colors, this should work. But it wasn't. So I just took photos of the mirror and photos of the toilet and pasted those on the bottle.
Mm.
Never got that mixed up again. Now, that's a really minor thing, but just an example of how simple these accommodations can be. Even like organizing the workspace. So it's optimized and more conducive. And the one thing about these types of accommodations are it typically makes things more simple and easier for everybody. When you have a task list, everyone can follow that and errors are reduced. I remember once we color coded forms and the boss was like, this is amazing. You should see the lack of mistakes I'm making from everyone. This is saving me so much time from having to ask people to redo things. So that's another thing to remember about accommodations. Not only are they pretty reasonable in price, easy to do by a manager without having to go through all the HR paperwork, they usually make it better for everyone. So those are just some kind of small examples.
It's interesting that you say the color coding thing because there was another financial group and there was like higher risk situations that they wanted more people involved or additional approval and overview before it would move forward with the client. And then there's things that was more just a process flow, paperwork type of thing. And they also did a paperwork color coding system because they constantly had mistakes or things were being approved when they shouldn't.
When they weren't.
They needed that
Mhm.
overview for the more high risk. And they had all the rules, right? All the procedures, but let's be real, we're humans. You're not
Right.
going to remember every
Yep.
rule and procedure. So they started color coding, and basically, like calm colors was like process all the way through. You were very competent and capable to do so.
Yep.
And then they had some dark color paper like red and like bright blue. And basically, it was like if you have a deep colored paper in your hand, you need to get this person involved, or because it was already written on the sheet but people were passing through, and it's not that they're
Ex-
trying to like make the mistake,
Nope.
it's just habit, right? We get into these
Yes.
like autopilots, and so basically any dark piece of paper had to go get this extra review because it was high risk. And interestingly enough, like you said, it cleaned up their workflow because not only human mistakes were decreasing, but the people who had approved these extra high risk situations, if they had light colored pieces of paper, it showed these people need more training in that subject or info because these light pieces of paper should not be on my
Don't need to
desk.
come to me. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so they cleaned up so many pieces of workflow in their operation based on color coding. And I
Yes.
thought that was phenomenal because even though we all see different shades, like blue is blue for most people. And then people who may have, color coding, disability or limitation, you can always do symbols and things like that.
Yes, exactly. And that's the thing, like different things work for different people. I remember people who loved a written checklist, and I had people who wanted me to literally like take pictures of each task and make that a checklist. So it's all, and like you said, if colors don't work for someone, you can use symbols. So there's all different ways, but cueing can be really helpful for a lot of different unseen disabilities.
Yeah.
So any kind of visual cue
And
is a benefit. And like you said, it typically, like, not only did they get less mistakes, their workflow get better, they probably saved us a ton of time for the people having stuff on their desk that they didn't typically need to sign and then walking it back over and explaining, I don't need to sign this, or even the backlog of like, I put that through without you signing it. I can imagine that could be a big storm of extra things that might need to happen. So streamlining a process like that is really beneficial for the company. And behind the scenes, you might be helping some of those people with unseen disabilities be more successful and you don't even know it.
right.
Um,
And
so,
even the practice of where you spend your mental calories and your think calories, right?
yeah,
I have to think, who does this go to? Does this go to the second approval? Where does this go next? Right? All these calories are being spent on decisions that I shouldn't be spending calories on. And when you have those visual cues, or even, user permissions and think all different things you can do in your system,
yes,
you don't have to think about, oh, I had to put it here and then I have to remember in the third step do this. Like it's a cue so that you can spend your mental calories and energy on the things that matter, the critical thinking, the customer
right.
interactions, the pivots that you do have to like make a decision on in the day. And as when you look in a company and where we're spending our energy, you will see a rework, broken blinkers, missteps in process. That's where these energy drains are coming from. So that's kind of want to go back to the beginning of our conversation when we're
Yeah,
talking about unseen disabilities.
yes,
And vocational discussions and accommodations, what we're talking about is where do people work best and where does that
exactly.
natural productivity flow and
Yep.
how can you support that. When Kate goes into organizations, this is the things that she's worked with. So Kate, tell me a little bit more about the other services that you partner up with clients on.
For employer clients, I can do anything from kind of coming on site, helping them with individual specific cases, making accommodations for a specific person, some of the things we've talked about. I also provide like a larger overall training on how to do this, how to make it simple and approachable, especially like how to equip your managers to do this without having to freak out and feel like, oh shoot, okay, now I have to make sure they get this doctor's paperwork and I have to make sure they get that to HR and then there's a certain time frame and just how to make this be more relaxing and simpler for everyone. So I have sort of I guess you'd call it, I don't know, like a signature training, just kind of a specific training on approachable accommodation basics. We definitely go through in a little more depth, specifically what some of these unseen disabilities are, specifically what you might see in the workforce, how to have those conversations. And I can also help people with something like, as you know, you were kind of mentioning earlier, the individual in the parking lot. Some more of those even early stages. The onboarding, the interview process, even job descriptions, the way job descriptions are written. We don't know it, but a lot of times job descriptions have like language in there that can frankly make people with disabilities feel like, oh, I don't know if I could do this job when they really could. So just an easy example, there's a lot of job descriptions that are like needs to be able to walk for a certain amount of time or needs to be able to be on their feet. Does that person actually need to physically walk? Sometimes the answer is yes, but sometimes it's simply no. They just need to be able to move and navigate
Mm,
through a space.
yeah.
It doesn't matter if they're walking to navigate through that space or if they're in a wheelchair or have some other type of mobility assistant with them. So it's just thinking through things like that. And one thing, like a small thing about interviewing, I'm just going to bring up because it was such an easy accommodation and the employer saw such a huge difference, but it's just simply setting up a few different chairs at a few different angles. You know, of course you're going to put the one directly in front of you, right? But you can put some like off to the side. And then when someone comes in for your interview, take a seat wherever you feel comfortable. So, you're already showing the company in a great light. Hey, we care about our employees. We care about making sure you feel comfortable and welcome. But you're also allowing them to put themselves in a position where they can perform the best and show you what they're really going to be like as an employee. Um, so I had a couple of folks who were neurodivergent and they were on the autism spectrum. And so making like strong level of eye contact was really difficult. And so in the interviews, instead of focusing on the questions, they'd just be so anxious in their head about making eye contact that they had a really hard time delivering on that answer. Now, of course, did we were these jobs that were super customer forward, front facing? No, they weren't because we knew that wouldn't be a great fit. If you have a customer service front facing job, okay, it makes sense to put that chair right in front of you, right? We need to know how they're going to act. We need to know how they're going to think on their feet. But I always tell employers if it's truly not an essential function, why are we assessing for it in an interview? It just doesn't make any sort of sense. So, even just thinking through like little things like that along the way, how can we make sure we're getting in top talent and giving them an opportunity to show us why they're top talent? That's another thing I do. So, sorry, I kind of got all over the place there, but I basically kind of help train employers from day one of putting the job requisition out there to working with someone who's struggling on the job.
Yeah, and I love the different way of thinking too, because for example, the customer service, they could be interacting with customer service, but if it's not face to face, like they're on the phone, does eye contact really matter, you know?
Exactly. Yep.
Yeah, and it gets you to back up. So Kate's information is going to be in the show notes. Go check out some of her management training, some of the coaching and consulting she can bring to your organization, or if you're struggling as someone with an unseen disability,
Yes.
feel free to reach out to her for some of her individual resources as well. Kate, thank you so much for coming in on the show and supporting Workforce Energy.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me. And this was a great conversation. And so often I feel people with disabilities don't really have a seat at the table. That it's getting better, but it's unfortunate. So I just want you to know I appreciate you so much for making the time to give them that seat and have this discussion and hopefully get some employers thinking a little bit differently how they view that sector of the workforce and also what they can do at work to make them more successful. So I really appreciate you.